question. Teacher, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, leaving a wife but no children, the man should marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers. The first married and died childless, and then the second and the third married her, and so in the same way all 7 died childless. Finally, the woman also died. In the resurrection, therefore, whose wife will the woman be? For the 7 had married her. Jesus said to them, those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. Indeed, they cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, where he speaks of the Lord as the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Now he is God not of the dead, but of the living, for to him all of them are alive. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. So, can God make a rock so big that God can't lift it? Or, how many angels can fit on the head of a pin? Why do you always answer a question with a question? Oh, do I? Questions that we cannot answer because we have a limited amount of personal knowledge about a thing, or they just don't have an answer. Jesus has asked a question like this today. A question that is asked, and while Jesus probably could answer the question, knows that within the question, there really isn't a question. It isn't asked because people are curious. It isn't asked because someone is writing the systematic theology of the Christ child. No, it's asked to trap Jesus. This is the third set of opponents in this section of Luke. We have the scribes, we have the Pharisees, and now the Sadducees. It's the only time that the Sadducees show up in the Gospel of Luke, and they ask a question that they don't even believe. They ask a question about the resurrection where Luke tells us that they do not believe in the resurrection. Makes sense, right? Yeah. Jesus thought so too. So now we read in this text, and if you're like me, when you first read this text, your mind goes directly to marriage. And that makes sense because it's used all throughout the text, and the illustration that Jesus uses is about marriage, but the gospel lesson is not about marriage. It's about life. It's about true life. It's about how we live this life in God. Now, there are deep questions that this text can pull from us. Most of them are about our loved ones, and will we see them in the resurrection? But again, this text isn't about marriage. It isn't about death. It is about God and how God is God of the living. Now, in the illustration, the Sadducees lay out a truly ridiculous but based on the law scenario. It's an example of the questions that I posed before. You say, we're going to lay out this example, Jesus, and can you tell us whose wife will this woman be in the resurrection in the end time? Now, first thing, it's important to notice that marriage is viewed differently in this text than we view it today. It's not necessarily about love and about falling and seeing that person across the room and going, oh, I'm going to spend the rest of my life. It's a contract. It's about man, and it's about a family saying you will marry this woman. That's going on. But secondly, what's going on in this text is a fulfillment of the law that was laid out in the Torah. That God cared so much about the widow that there's a law about taking care of them, because left to our own devices, we don't do that good a job. The widow and the orphan can be outcasts and without setting up a system where they'll be taken care of. So by law, by the Torah, it's required that this woman be given in marriage to the brother of her husband so that she would have support and not be left homeless or possibly better. But Jesus hears all of this, and he reads through the lines and knows that this is not what this is all about. You're pretending to be worried about what happens in death, so I'm going to just lay it out that God is the God of the living now, and the living then. Jesus seems to tell us that in the resurrection, things might be different. We might not know exactly how things are laid out, that to experience the full and complete love of God, things might be different there. But Jesus also lays out this point, that in Christ we are alive. And that new life that the Sadducees are talking about happening over that way, that new life begins now. That death is not the end of life, but rather a continuation from life to life. And he uses the Torah, the burning bush, God's words when God says, I am the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob, and there's no past tense here. It's not, I was the God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob. I am the God of these, and they are alive. So all of that begs the question, what does that mean for us today? I am so glad you asked. So as I was walking through Costco a couple of months ago, I think it was the beginning of October, I noticed that there was something large and something looming. There was 3 large walls that sat on top of another, and this face peered down, and it was all glittery, and it was joy-filled, and it was a huge snowman. Beginning of October. At this point, I knew Costco had told me that Christmas is 3 months away. Of course, Halloween was still a month away, and Thanksgiving was 2 months away, but Christmas, it was 3 months away. And I couldn't help but think of my mother, who always gives me sage advice. She is truly the wisest woman I know, and she'll probably be watching this later on the video, so I want to tell her that. Love you, Mom. But so, I remember when I was a kid, one of the phrases that I would say again and again would be like, I can't wait for Christmas. I can't wait. The first phrase. The other was, oh, when I get older, you know what I'm going to do? And my mother would use the phrase, John, don't wish your life away. Which for me sums up this gospel lesson. As Christ says, you have all of these questions about the resurrection, you have all of these things, and now the Sadducees are really laying this out to trap Jesus, but for us, we can get caught up in what all of this is happening, and we can focus on what's going to come. But for us, it's to pay attention to the new life in Christ found today. And God will take care of the other stuff. Life is life on this side of the veil or the other. Life is life here and there. Now, there are particular questions that we ask that will not be answered, though they might be pondered about, they might be prayed about, they might be talked about around the coffee pot and the coffee table. But do they have to keep us up at night? No. We remember that God is the God of the living. The names we read last week on All Saints' Day, as we lifted them up, is alive in Christ, and the names that we say today as we greet our neighbor, both are are alive in Christ. It has been said that we are not to worry about the past because that cannot be changed. And we're not to worry about the future because that's unknown, yet we lay that in God's hands. It's been said that we are to pay attention to the present because that is a gift from God. That's why they call it, they say, a present or the present. It's a gift, it's grace, it's life. So the question that I have is that how do we, as people of God, then help the other move in and live this life? So, my sermon was going to end right there, that this is a gift. But last night, I'm at a work gathering of Sharon's. It's at someone's house that's going away to Italy for like 8 months, and so she wanted to have this house party. And I got talking with this guy by the name, his name's Dan Register. And he runs this organization called K9 Calvary. And he had with him Ranger, his dog. And the dog was a therapy dog. And the dog was trained specifically for him to deal with his own issues that he had from serving in the military, his PTSD, his that. But he is a trainer in this organization. And each one of these dogs gets trained to be with a particular veteran, to work with that person specifically. And the idea is that this dog would be able to help this veteran rise above and start living this life today. To be helped, to walk with them, to be with them, to hold them close. And I'm having a conversation with this guy, and as things are going on in this room, we've moved off into the side, and we're having this conversation. And I'm like, there is no such thing as a coincidence. That when we look at ways that God can help bring life and restore life by how we live this world for the bettering of the other as God would have us do. Because truly, when we look at our lives as Christians, as we look at people who know that we are alive here and we are alive there, that our job then is to help our neighbors as they struggle, to help the people across the street, whether we know them or whether we are still being called to get to know them, to help them reclaim this life. A couple of months ago, we talked about Jack the dog, Lori and Alan, as they took in the dog of Virgil, and about how that really has brought in a sense of new life and purpose in all of that. There are ways that God might be plucking the heartstrings of you as you were called into this world. Ways that you've been called to use your own passions for the bettering of this world. Sometimes we get those thoughts in our head and we go, I don't know. My pastor, Barr, calls it like the bumblebee, that's the fly that's going around your head and you're trying to get rid of it, but yet it keeps coming back. Pay attention to those moments, because it might just be that God is getting your attention for you to help for the bettering of this world. Because in Christ you are already alive. And it's our beautiful gift to be able to help the other live a fuller and more joyful life